Informed Choice Radio, episode 245 with Alan Weiss, the rock star of consulting and co-author of Lifestorming.
Live from Sundial House Studios, this is Informed Choice Radio. Want to make the most of your money and your life? You've come to the right place. Now, here's your host, Martin Bamford.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Informed Choice Radio. My guest on the show today is an absolute giant in the world of consulting and public speaking. Alan Weiss is one of those rare people who can say he's a consultant, speaker and author, and really mean it. His consulting firm, Summit Consulting Group Inc., has attracted clients such as Hewlett-Packard, Mercedes-Benz, the Federal Reserve, the New York Times Corporation, Toyota, and over 500 other leading organizations. Alan's speaking typically includes 20 keynotes a year at major conferences, and he's been a visiting faculty member at several leading universities. His PhD is in psychology, and he served on the Board of Governors of Harvard University's Center for Mental Health and the Media. Alan is an inductee into the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame and the concurrent recipient of the National Speakers Association Council of Peers Award of Excellence, representing the top 1% of professional speakers in the world. His prolific publishing includes over 500 articles and 60 books, including his bestseller, $1 Million Consulting, which is now in its 25th year and 5th edition. The New York Post called him one of the most highly regarded independent consultants in America. His new book, co-authored with Marshall Goldsmith, is Lifestorming, Creating Meaning and Achievement in Your Career and Life. Lifestorming is an indispensable and practical handbook for becoming the person you want to be. Read the book to redesign your life, friends, behaviors, and beliefs to move closer to your goals every single day, guided by expert insight and deep introspection. The book is a guide which helps you learn why you do the things the way you do them and how to do them better. Please take a moment to connect with Alan on Twitter and let him know you heard him right here on Informed Choice Radio. You can find Alan on Twitter at BentleyGTCSpeed. Mention me too at Martin Bamford. You can find the show notes for this episode at icradio.co.uk/lifestorming. There's useful links, and you can also download the full episode transcript. That's all at icradio.co.uk/lifestorming. Here's my conversation with Alan Weiss, the rock star of consulting and co-author of Lifestorming, in episode 245 of Informed Choice Radio. Well, I'm delighted to welcome to Informed Choice Radio today Alan Weiss, author, a consultant, a speaker. He's actually author of a new book called Lifestorming, which is the subject of the podcast today. So, Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Martin. I'm happy to be here.
So can I start by asking this? Why do we find it so hard to create a lasting change in our life?
Well, we're drawn like gravity. It's the tropism that plants have to turn to light. We're drawn to what we've always done and what we're comfortable doing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as our life changes, as we grow and mature, we have to raise our own bar. We have to shoot for different things. But a lot of people, I call it the feathered nest syndrome. A lot of people keep feathering a nest so that it's so comfortable they don't leave it. And they need some kind of external force to leave it, and often that's a traumatic force. So if you can create this energy yourself to do new things, to leave the nest, it's so much better in terms of the life you'll lead.
So you're almost saying that we need to make our life slightly uncomfortable. If we can become too comfortable sometimes, and then we don't sort of make the change we need to make.
Yeah, Joseph Schumpeter called innovation creative destruction. And I've always liked that phrase. And what we have to do in our lives is create what you might call a creative tension. We might be far better off being less comfortable and more challenged. And my point, and the point in Lifestorming, is that you create those challenges for yourself, and you're better off handling them than if they're imposed from the outside, which they often are.
That makes sense, absolutely. So it's one thing to achieve the goals we achieve in life, but how can we go about choosing those goals in the first place, deciding on the person that we want to become?
Well, the goals have to be based on our own metrics. In other words, we often become a lawyer or a dentist because our parents were. People told me I argued well, and therefore I should be a lawyer. People told me I argued well, and therefore I should be a lawyer. And when I got to college, I took political science, which is a natural precursor to law. And I took the law entrance boards, which I killed. And so I had a complete scholarship to a law school. And that summer, I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I was doing this because of other people's metrics. So what we have to understand is that it's not only right and proper, it's imperative. We create our own metrics as we grow. And I'll just give you one example. I believe that everybody, in terms of a career, should be looking at what they're passionate about and what they're great at. And that is the artistry for one's career.
So it's got to be the sort of the mix of that passion and greatness that is the choice in terms of where we choose our goals.
That's right. If you just pursue money and try to love doing that, it's not going to be successful. Money is simply fuel. So if you find something, though, that you're really passionate about and you're great at doing, you'll learn to make money from it. Money will flow from it. It sometimes flows from the most unlikely sources. But that's what creativity is all about. And the fact is that life is short. And what we say to our readers, Marshall Goldsmith, my co-author, and I, what we say to our readers in the book, and what I say to people like you in interviews is, if not now, when?
And when you speak to people around establishing goals and trying to create a life that's full of meaning, full of achievement, are there any common elements where things that people tend to want to go for in life? People
tend to want to live a life, I think, that is one that they see others represent. So, for example, the reason we have celebrities today who are known only for being celebrities, the Kardashians or whatever. And by the way, this is not a recent phenomenon. If you go back to the 50s, we had the Gabor sisters, Zsa Gabor and so on. We've always looked to these people to say, oh, what a lifestyle. Today we have reality TV shows. What a lifestyle. I could be that. This is reality TV. And of course, they're all scripted, right? So we tend to look at these things and we get envious of them, but it also relieves us of the fact of really trying to do something because, well, they've got a lot of money and they've had these benefits and they're on TV. But we should really be setting metrics for ourselves such as, what makes me happy? What makes my family successful? How can we contribute to society? And a lot of people are successful at doing that because they're honest with themselves, and we give techniques in the book for how to look into those things, but they also hang out with people who help them to do it. So if you want to live in the fantasy world of, the yachts and the private planes, that's one thing. But if you really want to say to yourself something pragmatic, like I should be flying first class, staying in hotel suites, have financial reserves for my family, and so forth, that's a completely different way to look at life.
And what about meaning? Because a lot of that materialistic goals comes from wanting to be like celebrities, wanting to keep up with the Joneses, keep up with the neighbours. Does all of that lead to meaning, or is meaning something much deeper?
That's a great question. And here's what we found when we were talking about writing this book. We had, Marshall's been a coach for executives. I've been a coach for entrepreneurs, and we found amazing similarities. And the answer to your question is this. Too many people are going around searching for meaning. The point is to create meaning. And that's a very different dynamic. And so when you're searching for meaning, you're looking at what's important for other people. You're saying, does this fit me? It's like being in a clothing store. Does this look good on me? Does this fit my feet? But instead, what we should be doing is saying, I have a limited time on earth. What would constitute real contribution from me? No one has a right to use wealth without creating it. I think no one has a right to happiness without creating it. And so what's the contribution I make? How do I make my life meaningful? And people who are able to ask that of themselves turn out to be the people who best lifestorm.
And you mentioned earlier about this feathered nest syndrome, which is a great term for it. So during our lifetimes, do our goals tend to change as a result of that, as a result of feathered nest? Or do you think that goals are more successfully achieved when they don't change, when they're held onto for long periods of time?
Well, goals have to change because we change. And we call this in the book the life journey. And so consequently, we also talk about a phenomenon called critical abandonment, which means you have to give up things. You have to give up some friends. You have to give up some goals. Just like a business has to give up its bottom 10 or 15% of clients because they no longer suit them well. Otherwise, how do you bring on new clients? The same thing with our lives. And so goals should change. And the problem is when you feather the nest that you talked about, we don't change the goals. We say, here we are, and we have the same goals we had 5 years ago, so we don't grow. And here's the key. because of the laws of entropy, there's no such thing as a plateau. A plateau erodes. Yep. And unless you bring new energy into a system, it's the second law of thermodynamics or fourth law or something. Unless you bring new energy into a system, the system collapses. It uses up all its energy. So in our case, in our life's journey, the new energy has to come from new goals and new friends and new challenges.
And you mentioned critical abandonment and the concept of actually giving up friends. I know that would be quite a big step for a lot of people, but I've heard that as individuals, we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with or something like that. So friendships really do make that much difference to our success in life?
Yes, because they create our norms. So, for example, Marshall told me he still has a couple of friends from his youth. I don't. And so it varies with people. There are friends you have for a very long time. There are friends who are transient. They come and go because of the work you do, the geography in which you live, the hobbies you might pick up. Then there are virtual friends where people are in contact with you through electronic media and digital media and so forth. The thing about friends is this, though. Friends create norms. And so consequently, if you are successful and growing in life, but your friends are not, they will tend to drag you back to where you came from instead of helping you to go where you need to be. And so I advocate bringing on new friends who represent your aspirations, who represent your goals in life as they change. We see a lot of people, for example, in the United States, there was a very excellent quarterback named Michael Vick making $25 million a year. But he was arrested and sent to jail for dogfighting. He had dogfights in his house, which in the United States is illegal and repugnant, and probably in most places.
Yeah, so.
But he hung out with friends from his old days when he was a kid and a teenager and never changed them. And for them, that was a normal piece of behavior. So even as a multi-million-dollar star athlete, he engaged in that behavior because of his friends, and it just about ruined him. So that's the power that friends have, and that's why we have to intelligently and deliberately make changes.
What else can hold us back from achieving our goals? So socializing with the wrong friends, associating with friends from the past can do that. Yeah, feathering your nest can do that. Is there anything else that can hold you back?
Yes. If you identify with safety and excessive protection, it will hold you back. In other words, if you go to a casino, there's a phrase called playing with house money. And that means when you're ahead, you bet more because it's the house money, you want it. And so you don't become an imprudent gambler, but you prudently take risk. And the same thing with life. You have to understand the difference between gambling and prudent risk. And prudent risk means that you can help to prevent problems or deal with them if they occur, mitigate them. So what holds us back is thinking we can create absolute safety. What holds us back is the belief that we have all the time in the world. When you're in your 20s, you believe you have all the time in the world. In your 30s, you say, well, I have a little less time. But once you get, up to your 50s and 60s, you realize the horizon is closer. The book I'm working on right now is called 70 and More. And it's about what happens to people as the horizon gets closer. And you start to realize there are things I'm not going to do. So you have to have not only change trends, you have to have a supportive family, you have to have a support system, and you have to have the personal self-esteem and wherewithal to say, for me to achieve higher level goals, I have to be able to take prudent risk.
And I know within the book you talk about the building blocks of character. So how do people go about building character?
Well, we identified 6 criteria for character. And just to give you an idea, our contention was that character isn't something you're simply born with or you're imbued with. It's something you can develop. So, for example, one aspect of character is intelligence. And that means that you need to be well-read. It means you need to be articulate. You need to be fluent. You need to comprehend what you're reading. You need to be able to write with expression and speak with influence. Another dimension is generosity. And that means you have to be able to give. It not necessarily money, but you need to be able to give your time. You need to be able to give your resources. You need to be able to coach others. Still another is what we call intimacy. And that means that you need to be able to develop friendships, as we just discussed. They're very important. But you also need to be vulnerable. You need to be honest. You need to share with people what you think your failings are and either get their help or get their response that that's not really a failing. So we identified these kinds of elements and suggested to people that they look at them and determine what they can do on an ongoing basis to keep building them and support them.
So would that be the first step if somebody was approaching this subject and thinking, I want to get more out of life, I want to achieve goals and live a life full of meaning? Would it be to look at those 6 character blocks and determine where they've got deficiencies, where they need to improve?
Well, they're important, but they're not first, they're concurrent. And one of the things we discovered in Lifestorming is that these aren't sequential steps, they're concurrent steps. And while we think of implementing a plan, buying a new house, buying a car, going on vacation, as a series of sequential steps, our life has to be concurrent steps. So we need to look at character, absolutely, but we also need to look at friendships. We also need to look at this critical abandonment. We also need to look at how often we're able to improve and change our goals, because these things are synergistic and they reinforce each other.
What's the role of a coach through all of this? I mean, how do people make this change in their life? Can it be done on your own, or is it best working with a professional, with a coach?
We think it's best to work with someone because you need the outside contribution that's objective and not tainted. A lot of friends will be loath to tell you the absolute truth. They'll just try to support you as friends. Sometimes your family is reluctant to do it. But it's not just any coach. You need somebody who's been there and done that. In other words, you don't want to learn to ski from somebody who sits in the chalet sipping brandy and say, tomorrow morning when you go up there, do this. Mm-hmm. You want somebody who's about 6 yards ahead of you, showing you how to bend your knees and traverse the slope. And the same thing with a coach. You want somebody who's been successful at creating his or her own life change and new goals. But also you want a coach fairly briefly. In other words, you don't want codependency. You shouldn't need a coach on a long-term basis. So you probably use a coach for 30 days or 60 days, something like that, to help you with some of these things. And, it's interesting that most of us are very effective coaches. All of us, you and me and everyone else, has talked to friends, has talked to colleagues, talked to acquaintances who have had a problem. We've given them advice and they've improved. So it's not a matter of finding some coach who has 14 certificates on the wall or 100 initials after his or her name. It's a question of finding someone who you really trust, and whether it's on a for-pay basis or it's on a non-paying informal basis, somebody can give you honest advice.
When you were writing Lifestorming with Marshall, was there anything as part of your research and preparation for the book that jumped out at you that was perhaps things that we don't tend to consider when we're discussing goal setting, achievement, and finding a life of meaning?
Yeah, there were 2 things that it was interesting, because Marshall would say to me, all right, that's interesting, but prove it. How do you know that works? And I'd say to him, well, that's interesting, but what would that look like in real life? And we found 2 things. One is the aspect of permission. And we identified 4 stages of permission. There's one that says, I have no permission to do anything. And so I'm not going to make any decisions, take any risks. The second is, if somebody gives me permission, I'll do it. The third is, I can give myself permission. And the fourth is, I have permission. Mm. And one of the examples we used was that, you're sitting in an airplane, it's been in the air for 10 minutes, the pilot hasn't turned off the seatbelt sign, and you have to use the lavatory. But you're loath to get up because the seatbelt sign is on. You don't want the flight attendants to yell at you. But then someone gets up and goes to the lavatory. And now when that person comes out, other people do. So that person who got up gave everyone else permission. And, Marshall said, my God, that's happened to me. Now, if you simply transpose that, it happens in life every day. The other thing we found was the concept of what I call watertight doors, which is, at a basic level, we need to survive. We need to put food on the table. We need to have a secure job and so forth. And then after surviving, we're alive and we have something consistent and steady. We try to build it. And then we've arrived and we're very successful. And then the final stage is thrive. People come to us because we're so successful. They want our help. But each of those levels has a watertight door. And if you don't seal the watertight door, what you find is that even people who are highly successful, they're thriving, have a poverty mentality. It's not just a matter of not picking up the check. They're afraid to do things. They're afraid they will never be successful again. They think that we're lucky. They feel like imposters. And the point is, in Lifestorming, unless you can acknowledge and identify how good you are and where you're getting, you'll always act as if you're not. And that doesn't help.
So I'm assuming that needs to be an ongoing process where you consciously recognize that you've moved to a different level and that you need to, as you say, seal that watertight door behind you.
That's right. And we have in the book the metrics to say, have I sealed this door or not? And what do I have to do to make sure it's closed?
That's fascinating stuff. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today on Informed Choice Radio. Before you go, where can our listeners find out a bit more about you, and where can they buy a copy of the book?
Well, they can find out about me on, and get a lot of free material, audio, video, and text on alanweiss.com, ALANWEISS.com, and also my blog, contrarianconsulting.com. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn, and take on all comers. If you want to be a buddy or a friend or a follower or whatever, I'm happy to do that. And Lifestorming, of course, is available all over. Probably the best deal for it is Amazon.com, but it's also on the bookstore on my site.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll put links to all of those into our show notes for this episode too, so our listeners can find it nice and easily. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. I had a great time. Thank you.
A big thank you to Alan for joining me on the podcast today. There was something in particular Alan said during our conversation that particularly stuck in my mind. He said, the same thing with life. You have to understand the difference between gambling and prudent risk. Prudent risk means that you can help to prevent problems or deal with them if they occur, mitigate them. What holds us back is thinking we can create absolute safety. What holds us back is the belief that we have all the time in the world. What was your favourite part of our conversation? Do let me know on Twitter at Martin Bamford, or in the comments section in the show notes for this episode. You can find those at icradio.co.uk/lifestorming. And that's also where you can find useful links, and you can download the full transcript for this episode. That's all at icradio.co.uk/lifestorming. Don't forget to connect with Alan on Twitter. You can find him there at BentleyGTCSpeed. And before you go, please do take a moment to share this podcast episode with a friend on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Each time you share an episode on social media, it does so much to help boost us up the podcasting charts and reach even more new listeners. And if you've not done so before, please do leave us a quick review on iTunes. Or if you listen to this episode in Stitcher Radio, go ahead and press that star button on the episode. That really helps us too. Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you so much for your continued support of this podcast. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and this is Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.